Archeo, welcome to Fishterviews. How are you doing today?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for asking. This is your first time being Fishterviewed. Are you excited?
Yes, I'm absolutely excited, and I can very confidently say that I have never been fish interviewed before. So this is a brand new experience.
You know what they say, until you've been Fishterviewed, you've never really lived. So,
The true friends were the fish interviews along the way.
yes, exactly. All right, well, would you introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. I'm ArcheoPlays. I go by ArcheoPlays online, but you may have also heard that my name is also Dr. Heather Christie. I'm an archaeologist, and I play Minecraft, and I teach people archaeology through Minecraft. That's basically what I do.
Amazing. So, how did you get into archaeology as a profession?
Oh, there might be a long answer to that.
Perfect.
So I have always been interested in different cultures and different languages since I was like tiny. Um, and when I was a teenager, I went to a summer camp where teenagers from around the world can learn like cultural understanding and communication skills and things, cross cultural communication skills and such. And I met a bunch of kids from around the world, and a lot of whom were from countries I had never heard of at the time. And after that experience finished, my mom and I were driving back home, and I was like, I wish that you could just do this for a job, just like learn about other people's cultures for a job. And my mom was like, well, actually, you can. It's called anthropology. And I was like, you're joking. And so from basically like age 13, I knew that I wanted to be an anthropologist. In the United States, anthropology is divided into four subfields. So there's cultural anthropology, there's linguistic anthropology, there's biological or physical anthropology, and then there's archaeological anthropology, which is where archaeology comes in. So when I went to college, I knew that I wanted to study anthropology, and I took all of the courses that I could as quickly as I could. And one of the things that I found, I liked the courses, but one of the things I found really kind of odd was that a lot of the way that I was taught linguistics and cultural anthropology and physical anthropology was a certain amount of like removing the people from the equation. And I didn't get into anthropology to take the people away. I got into anthropology to look at the people. And the reason I should say that that's not entirely what those fields do. That's just the way that I was taught in the intro classes at the time.
Hmm.
But also, like, there's a lot of trying to figure out who people are and what people do. And archaeology, helpfully, because we don't have the people, we can't just go and talk to the people who lived 2,000 years ago. We're desperately trying to put the people back into the equation in archaeology as much as we can. When I finished my undergrad degree, so anthropology, again, in the United States, because it's four field, the department I was in was very much like, you need to be well rounded in all four fields. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. And then I finished my degree, and they're like, yeah, so if you want to go to grad school, you have to pick one of the four subfields to specialize in. And I was like, that's completely contradictory to everything you've been telling us for the last 4 years. So they're like, yeah, we know, but you have to pick. And me being the stubborn sort of person that I am, I found the loophole that archaeology is basically the cultural, linguistic, and physical slash biological anthropology of the past. So I could still do whatever I wanted just in the past. And I liked the past anyway. So so I was like, okay, that fits. So yeah, so there was a lot of like genuine interest, but then there was also a certain amount of like loophole finding, and also really wanting to emphasize the kind of human stories behind everything that we were researching. And the way that I had been taught in the intro classes for the other fields, they hadn't really done that to the extent that I was looking for. And that kind of pushed me over into archaeology.
Interesting. So when you talk about like the human element, what sort of things do archaeologists slash anthropologists look at when they're talking about ancient humans or even modern humans and studying them?
Oh, anything that relates to humanity, anything that humans have ever done. One of the things that I love to emphasize with my students and my audience is that people have been people for as long as people have been people. So people have been just as smart, just as brave, just as complex as we are today. They've been that way for thousands of years, and it's not like people who lived in ancient Mexico, what is now Mexico. It's not like they were somehow less intelligent than we are today. They're just as intelligent. They just were working with different technological developments at the time. It's really difficult to invent the internet when you have no concept of the internet, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's difficult to build on inventions when you don't have a concept of what those inventions are, right? So everything that we do today is because somebody did something in the past that has led us to the point that we're at today to be able to do whatever it is we're doing that is leading to these further advances. And that also applies to, less than savory elements of humanity. People have been smart and ridiculous and silly for as long as people have been people. People have also been violent and hurtful and such. Any adjective you can apply to humans today, you can apply to humans in the past. And I feel like a lot of the time we tend to think of people in the past as being like this other group of people that doesn't relate to us in quite the same way. But when you're looking at archaeology, like when you're digging stuff out of the ground that people have put there 2,000 years ago, they're objects we find that have handprints in them and fingerprints, and they've been worn down by people's knees from kneeling at a hearth, for example. And I just, that's I don't know how you couldn't enjoy that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure there are people who don't, but for me, it just wouldn't compute.
No,
So I
that's
don't know
really
if that answered
interesting.
your question. I feel
It
like I
does.
went on
It's
a
really
tangent there,
interesting.
but yeah.
Well, to add to a tangent, when you talk about like humans have always been having certain unsavory aspects, have you ever read? There's a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. Have you ever read it out of
I
curiosity?
haven't. No, I'm aware of
Okay.
Steven Pinker, but I haven't read that book. No.
Oh, it's a really interesting book, and it's basically talking about how we're living right now in the safest era of humanity ever. And it
Yes.
takes a bunch of data talking about like how violent we were in the past and kind of compares it to now and just kind of goes over like we're actually in probably the most peaceful era of humanity that's ever existed. And even though we are inundated because of the internet with media talking about all of the terrible things we do all the time, we're actually like unbelievably safe compared to 700 years ago. So it's a really interesting book. I highly recommend it. But that your comment made me think of the book because it's an interesting aspect of it.
I agree in terms of, just the general nature of humans these days. Not to say that people in the past were more violent necessarily, just that there were different understandings of how to settle disputes, but
Mm-hmm.
also people would, when you ran into a different group, there was often a lot more at stake. Whereas today, a lot of the time, boundaries are already defined. And
Mm-hmm.
so there are places in the world where they're not and where they're definitely disputed. And I am not discounting those in the slightest. But, you know, it's generally understood where somebody's house property is, and that's established legally, for example, or where a town borders are, or where a nation's borders are. And so when those things become contested, it becomes a much bigger sort of global issue than it necessarily was in the past, because in
Mm-hmm.
part because of the internet, and in part because it's relatively it's, I don't know, I guess I would say it's probably a little less usual. I don't want to say that as a blanket statement though, because I feel like I
Yeah.
haven't looked at the data. But yeah, I could certainly see the argument of the book. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also something to be said for we're living in a more stable era resource wise.
Yes.
With like food and medicine and all that stuff, it's
Yes.
compared to like the medieval ages where it was you were so much more dependent on the crops that you grew during the growing season, and then there was the non-growing season where food was more scarce. And not to say that certain people aren't experiencing that now, but we are more stable, just as a
Absolutely.
species, and I'm sure that has reduced conflict greatly.
Yes. And also we have more, as you're getting at, we have a lot more security to an extent in terms of what we know will be available and provided, if that makes sense. And there's also laws in place to protect people against, like workplace dangers or ethics violations. Those weren't in place in the past.
Hmm.
If you look at, for example, the whaling industry of the 19th century, um, those men would go out on a ship and then they'd spot a whale. They'd get into rowboats, row over to the whale, harpoon the whale, and then hope that they made it back to their main ship. But they would have to row the whale back. And that's
Yeah.
before they even get to processing the whale. That's just the dangers of catching the whale in the first place. And
Hmm.
that was just how it was. So there's also, yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of protections in place. And interestingly, connected to that, I would also say for a lot of people, a lot of people assume that that all protections are very recent, but they're not necessarily. So, for example, in the early medieval period, so in 697 CE, or I use CE instead of AD, but it's the same number system.
Hmm.
You get We have a document called the Kainad of Nain, which is or the Law of the Innocents, which is a legal document that was created in what is now Ireland, and it was signed by abbots and kings and other rulers and nobility and thinkers of the late 7th century. And part of that document, or the main crux of that document, is defining who cannot be harmed in warfare. So it explicitly states that the elderly, women, and children should be safe in warfare. They should not be targeted. Um,
Interesting.
and they do. There's a degree to which it's like non-combatants. So if, say, there is a woman on the battlefield, then they're putting themselves in that position. They are now a warrior. You can target warriors, but you can't just go and raid a village and target civilians in the village, for example. And that's in 697 CE. So so that's
Interesting.
long before even the high medieval period. It's about yeah, we're eh, what is that, 1400 years ago,
Yeah.
1300, 1350,
Math is
1350
hard.
years ago. Yeah, math is hard, but it's a long time ago, a lot longer than you might think. And that's not the only document of the kind. It's just one that I'm aware of because I study early medieval Scotland. So that's an easy example, but there are loads and loads of laws across humanity and across time that are intended to protect people from negative elements of society. Another
Interesting.
example of this is the common misconception that a lot of ancient Egyptian monuments, like the pyramids or a lot of stuff in the Middle Kingdom, for example, that those were all built by slaves. They weren't actually necessarily built by slaves. We have villages where the workers lived and they were treated for broken bones. They were given days off for illness. In fact, there are entries from the Middle and New Kingdoms in papyrus where it's the log of who turned up to work and who didn't, and why. And one of the more common reasons that people didn't turn up to work to build the monuments of ancient Egypt was because they were hungover. So, so you don't exactly, that's not something that slaves necessarily would have been allowed to do. That doesn't mean that there weren't slaves in ancient Egypt, just that the story is a lot more complicated than we kind of necessarily think about in terms of popular
Interesting.
understandings of the past.
So I have actually heard that before,
Hmm.
that there were a lot of very highly skilled tradespeople involved in
Yes.
that project, like masons and stone carvers and things like that, and that they were paid for their labor,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
their skills were highly sought after in designing these monuments.
Yes. The other thing with ancient Egyptian monuments is that it's we should remember that the Nile floods every year.
Hmm.
I'm being so bad at fishing because I'm getting distracted by tangents. But yeah, so the Nile floods every year, which means that their main farmland was underwater for a certain portion of the year. But
Hmm.
all of the farmers still needed to be able to eat. And so what the pharaohs did, at least for a certain amount of the time, is they would commission these impressive monuments and they would hire the farmers who could no longer work in their fields because their fields were underwater, and then they would pay the farmers in grain so that they still had food for their families even though the fields were inaccessible.
Interesting.
So that's yeah, that's protections in place in ancient Egypt, like Middle Kingdom Egypt. It's already there.
That is so interesting that back then, when we think about, I think, ancient society is like only, the top people had resources or were treated well in any sense. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's like a strong misconception, especially because of media, of the idea of like, oh, the high and mighty kings or pharaohs or whoever were the leaders, and then everyone else was peasantry and they were just treated terribly in all instances. But
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense in like practical terms, in terms of running a kingdom or running an empire, right? Because if
Yeah.
you don't have any workforce or anything like that, it's
Then
how
there
are
are no
you going to?
resources for the king to have. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
exactly. So that's interesting. It does make sense when you put it like that. That of course they would
Yeah.
want to keep their workforce healthy and fed. I love the
Yeah.
idea of like, well, oh man, the Nile's flooding again. Let's just commission a pyramid because we gotta
Yeah,
give them
that's
something to do.
literally what it was. It was like, oh, I guess, we have, I don't know, 15% of our population is suddenly out of a job. Let's put them to work making mud bricks, or let's put them to work carving, in the quarries, or get them dragging heavy stones over to whatever monument we're building this year. That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
It makes
I,
so much sense on so many levels. I mean, when we look
yeah.
at data, we know that, for example, unemployment leads to a rise in crime,
Hmm.
and other societal issues. So finding a way to put your currently unemployed workforce to work is a great idea.
Yeah,
And why
absolutely.
not build a pyramid, I guess.
Yeah, when you've got sandstone, although they were using limestone, but still, when you've got limestone,
Yeah. I was about to say, is it sandstone? I didn't think so.
yeah, it's not. It's limestone. Limestone, they're entirely limestone in the Old Kingdom, and then when you get to the Middle Kingdom pyramids, they realized that they could make the middle out of mud bricks and save on fancy materials. But that's why a lot of the pyramids from the Middle Kingdom, you look at them and they look like they're mostly collapsed. It's because the mud brick inside the straw that's in the mud brick has decayed, and so the mud
Oh.
brick collapses, and then the rest of the pyramid collapses. So the Middle Kingdom pyramids have a lot, like they often have a lot more decoration inside, depending on the pyramid or also the time period. But the outsides, they tend to look like big piles of sand and dirt that are slowly eroding away, because the inside of the pyramid, the bits that were not visible were generally made out of mud brick instead of the limestone.
Are
Yeah.
there efforts to are there efforts to try to preserve the structures overall, or is the philosophy more like we should allow these to age naturally?
So I'm going to talk about this kind of generally rather than Egypt specific.
Yeah.
In terms of archaeology, we have a lot of different goals with archaeology, and one of them is preserving the past as much as we can to be able to understand as much about the past as we can. But if we tried to preserve everything, then entire nations wouldn't be able to build anything on any of their land because all of it is archaeologically relevant. And that's not just for like European nations, for example. Pretty much, I can pretty confidently say that basically every nation would not have buildable surface area for
Hmm.
for things like new office buildings or new houses, or anything that you would need for society to exist. So archaeologists also accept that we're never going to preserve everything. So part of archaeology is making judgments about what to preserve and what not to preserve, what to leave in the ground and what to take out of the ground. Generally speaking, if we know that we can't preserve something, we try to excavate it as best we can before we need to let construction do its thing. But there are times where we realize that if you've got an archaeological site that is underground in a national park, for example, we might say, okay, well, we're not going to excavate the site because the best place preservation wise for it is to stay in the ground. But because it's in a national park, we don't need to worry about construction happening over top of it. We'll just tell, the National Park Services that they should put not put a building there, basically, just say this is not an area where you want to put, a ranger hut or something like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, but in terms of the philosophies of different archaeologists, you also find that a lot of archaeologists have differing. We don't have differing opinions on the fact that some things don't survive and the fact that some things should be preserved and how some things should be preserved. But it's more like where the lines are that will differ in opinions on a lot of the time. So there are some archaeologists who are very much like everything must be preserved to the best of our ability, no matter what. And then there are other archaeologists who are like, look, it's the world. People are meant to live in it. We can't preserve everything, so it's fine. And then there's everybody in between. It's it's a whole spectrum of thought. For me personally, I feel like if we're talking about descendant communities, so people who are related to the people who built a site, so they're descendants of those ancestors, and they are looking at a site and saying, hey, we want to be using this temple that our ancestors built 400 years ago. We want to continue using this temple for worship of, Buddha or something like that. Then I'm in the camp that they should be allowed to do that. It's their own heritage. It's more their heritage than it is mine. It's
Hmm.
something that their ancestors have created. So that's very much working in dialogue with the communities that are descendants of the culture that we are looking into. And that's a thing that's actually a big difference between archaeologists and between, say, like the antiquarians of the 19th century, for example, or a certain amount of pseudo archaeology, which is not good archaeology. It's like, I don't want to say fake archaeology, but that's literally what pseudo archaeology means. So
Like Indiana
uh,
Jones
Indiana
archaeology.
Jones. Indiana Jones is a bad archaeologist. He's a great character. I'm all for him as a character in stories, but oh my goodness, is he a bad archaeologist? I forget where I was with that train of thought. Hold on. Oh no.
Next YouTube video, ArcheoPlays comments on Indiana Jones movies.
Oh my gosh, right? Oh man. No, I've actually purposefully avoided a lot of pseudoscience, pseudo archaeology stuff
Hmm.
online because I don't want the hordes to come for me. And I know they will. But anyway, yes, okay. So I was saying that that's a big difference between archaeologists and between, say, the antiquarians of the 19th century is that we are very much, when we do things, when we dig, it's very much with the permission of the government, the landowners, usually the descendant communities who are directly related to the thing that we're digging up. We don't just go, like, you can't just go into a church, an old church, and start digging around where there are human graves, for example. That's not a
Hmm.
legal thing you can do. So it's something we work very closely. Generally speaking, we work very closely with the local communities or the descendant communities if they happen to not be local, for whatever it is that we're digging, and we're very very careful to make sure that we're being as ethical as we can. And archaeological ethics is only getting better, or at least it should be.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that every archaeologist is super ethical, but we're doing a lot. The goal is to be, and the field is has been aiming in that direction for a long time at this point.
No, that's fantastic to hear. Um, I mean, it definitely I'm assuming the old timey sort of. When I say old timey, I mean like remember the like Victorian era sort of
Yeah,
historian,
antiquarians.
yeah, antiquarians, I
Yeah,
guess
yeah,
is the
yeah,
term we're using. Who are just like going to places and being like, "This is mine now."
yes,
That is not what's
yeah,
happening, hopefully,
yeah.
anymore.
Just picking stuff up. Yeah, there's it's really interesting because I study, before I got into digital archaeology and imaging and such. My kind of like original love in archaeology is glass, ancient glass, and I
Okay.
specifically study ancient glass beads because they're one of the most ubiquitous trade items that we get across the world for multiple millennia, like since 500 BCE. Glass beads have been a big trade item across the world. So it's
Interesting.
interesting with the antiquarians because they cared a lot about ancient glass beads. They talked a lot about glass beads, and they did a lot of relatively good work. I mean, there's still issues with it, but they did generally a lot of stuff with ancient glass. And then we reach a point that's kind of like the 1920s to the 1950s, where archaeology and antiquarians just stopped caring about glass beads. They started, the only thing they would write is like glass beads were also found. I'm like, great. The antiquarians at least told me how many of each color, and like
Yeah.
where in the site they were. You've just told me that they were found somewhere in this, 500-meter square zone. I don't know where that, or like how do they wouldn't even tell me what layer they were found in. I'm like, I can't even date these. So it's interesting because you do get the antiquarians, they had a lot of issues, and we definitely should never go back to that style of archaeology, but they also aren't all bad. They do have some things that they did relatively well, certainly at times better than people who came several decades after them, which is really strange to be able to say. But glass beads, here we are.
That's so interesting. And it's interesting because now glass beads I feel like are kind of what? You can go into a craft store and buy a bucket of glass beads
Yeah,
for $20. But
yeah,
in the past they were literally currency. And
absolutely. Yeah,
it's so
they were
interesting
they were so important. Oh my goodness.
how times have changed. So I literally could listen to you talk about archaeology probably for 8 hours straight.
I
Um,
promise you I could also talk about archaeology incessantly, so don't give me free reign to talk about archaeology.
I really wish I could because I'm so interested, but I want to get into the Minecraft aspect of it. So I'm
Yeah.
so curious how you got into Minecraft and how you have then tied archaeology and Minecraft together to create ArcheoPlays as a whole kind of concept of what you do.
Yeah. So I this goes back to a lot of things. We're getting into another topic here, tangentially. It's a tangent. Am I surprised? No. Basically, I finished my PhD in 2019. I graduated with my PhD in 2019, and I my PhD was in it was in digital imaging of archaeological finds, and a lot to do with photography and such, and that connected to communication of archaeology between archaeologists. But my entire career, I've also been teaching in museums and historical properties. So I'm all about communicating archaeology in the past and history to regular people who are not necessarily nerd archaeologists like me. And so I have a certain amount of experience with communicating that to people. Unfortunately, in the fall of 2019, well, kind of in the spring, but like certainly by the fall of 2019, I had some serious medical issues that basically took me out of academia. And by like February of 2020, I was home bedridden sort of thing for the like most of 2020. Until May of 2021, I was stuck at home. I couldn't do anything. And my original plan with my PhD was to be, go the traditional kind of academic route and either work in a museum or work in academia and do archaeological research. And the I ended up being diagnosed eventually with 7 different chronic illnesses, which
Oh no,
made it very clear. Yeah,
I'm so
my
sorry.
yeah. So I like to say that either that I'm an overachiever and my body took that to heart. So it's like we need 7 chronic illnesses, right? We can't just have one. We got to overachieve in the chronic illness game too. Um, Either that or the
Sorry.
other thing I like to say is that it took me a long time to convince my body that chronic illnesses aren't Pokemon and we really don't need to catch them all.
Hmm.
So, so I have 7 chronic illnesses. They make life very complicated, but it also means that I can't guarantee that I'm ever going to be free at a specific time on a specific day consistently. So I
Hmm.
can't say, oh, yes, I can lecture from 10 to 11 a.m. on a Tuesday because I have no idea how Tuesday morning is going to go from one week to the next. So a lot of 2020 was me dealing with chronic illness and also dealing with the fact that this career path that I had been working towards for like 15 years was no longer possible and probably wouldn't be possible at all ever. So that
Hmm.
was a lot. And basically, because I was so ill and I was in a lot of pain and I was on a lot of medications, I had a lot of free time on my hands doing absolutely nothing. So I got into Minecraft, and I saw people building stuff in Minecraft on YouTube, like Flip and people mostly Flip and like pixel riffs and things.
Hmm.
And then I was like, oh, that looks cool and interesting and varied enough that it'll keep me occupied for more than like a week. So I started playing, and then I discovered modded Minecraft. I discovered Sky Factory 4,
Hmm.
and that was kind of my fate was sealed. So Sky Factory 4, I don't play it so much anymore, but it holds a special place in my heart because it got me through like the worst of the chronic illness depression that happened.
Hmm.
But basically, as I started playing Minecraft and I started building stuff, I was like, this would actually be really good for archaeology. It'd be really cool to build, famous archaeological sites and then talk about why they're important. And I could make YouTube videos doing that. And I was like, all right. So I kind of hemmed and hawed for a little bit, and then I decided to just go for it. And I built the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, and which is the temple that has the staircase with the serpents coming down, and when the light hits it right, it lights up the serpents, and it's really cool. So I built that, and I made a video, and I published it, and people liked it. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll keep doing this. And so then I did the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, and then I ended up doing Fushimi Inari Taisha, which is a Shinto temple in Japan, the one with all of the gates, like the Torii gates, the Shinto gates on the
Yeah.
path that a lot of influencers like to take photos of and things. And then I built Dracula's castle for Halloween, and it just kind of went from there. And the response was so positive that I just kept doing it. And eventually, we reached the launch of season 2 of Empires SMP, and colleagues of mine and I were getting ready for an Archeo gaming conference that we were having that summer. And that was when Pix released his first episode saying that he was going to be an archaeologist in that season. I was like, okay. So I took a chance, and I emailed Pix and was like, would you be interested in doing a conference presentation about archaeology and Minecraft with me? And he said, sure. And then it's basically just gone from there, just kind of expanding on the archaeology theme in Minecraft and connecting with people. And the timing of archaeology getting added to Minecraft was just perfect timing. I don't think I could have asked for better timing for
Yeah.
that. So yeah, that's effectively how I ended up here.
No, that's so interesting. So, when we talk about archaeology in Minecraft, do you
Mm-hmm.
almost, if you join a server that you've never been on before that's been running for a while, do you walk around and look at it from the perspective of an archaeologist and go, okay, I wonder when this was built. I wonder who did this. What's this item sitting over here? Is that how you sort of think about things?
A
I'm so
100%.
curious. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's not like the only way that I think about things. Probably. Well, I say this. I haven't thought about that question, so it might be the only way I think of things. It's definitely a question that I end up with, or like when I'm looking at people's builds, it's like, okay, how have people represented that this building has been here for a long time? And not everybody does, but when people do, it's always really interesting to see, where the color has faded, or where there's lichen growing, or where there are vines or something, or cobwebs and things. I love seeing how people represent the passage of time in Minecraft, because
Hmm.
because people do it. Number one, they do it very similar ways, but also they do it very differently at the same time. So it's always nice to see, and it's also nice to get ideas. i
Hmm.
I like looking at people's builds and getting ideas for how to do that myself. But yeah, and the other thing, so connected to this, well, this another tangent, I'm sorry, I can't help myself, um is the representation of sites in Minecraft. So one of the things that I've noticed, particularly for archaeologists or museum professionals, archaeological organizations, when they come into Minecraft and they build an ancient site, they'll try to be as accurate as possible with the materials. So if you have a site that's like this massive Neolithic village that's built out of cobblestone, they'll just build the entire build with cobblestone. But in Minecraft, on the one hand, I mean, it's not bad, but it's not nice to look at compared to a lot of other options. And so part of getting the past represented in Minecraft is also looking to people who are just building in Minecraft and not really worrying about material consistency necessarily. They're concerned about how it looks and what the artistry is, because
Hmm.
that ends up leading to significantly more interesting builds. And if the build is more interesting, people are more likely to explore it and find out what's there. So yeah, I steal people's build ideas all the time for for making things more interesting, but also making things look old. It's a lot of fun.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. So, are a lot of museums or other places like that using Minecraft as a tool to teach archaeology then,
A lot of
especially
them
to younger
are
people?
starting to or trying to, yes. There a lot of them. So there was a company here in Scotland called Immersive Minds, and they did a lot of school programs with kids, but they focused mostly on education editions. So the things
Okay.
that you can do in edition are very different to what you can do in Java and Bedrock these days. And a certain amount of education edition isn't necessarily like, it's very simplified, which means that a certain amount of it isn't accurate. There's actually a geologist, a content creator who goes by Nice Name, but Nice is spelled like the rock, Gneiss. And he's gone through Education Edition for geology and pointed out where the problems are, and they're a lot, and that's just for geology. So it's just for the different stone types, for example. So yeah, so there are definitely things in Education Edition. There have been things recently, I think, with the last uh, sort of series of announcements. There was the discussion of the map for Mexico and Mexican heritage, or Hispanic heritage, at least in Education Edition, I believe. So there is a certain amount of stuff that happens there. Here in Scotland, there's an organization called Dig It, which is running a program called Crafting the Past, where they have recreated various Scottish archaeological sites in Minecraft, and the maps are available for download from their website. So it's something that a lot of museums are looking into as options for engaging members of the public, especially because if we can engage people who are happy to look at historical builds or archaeological builds in Minecraft aren't necessarily the same group of people who are happy to go and spend an hour or two in a museum, for example. So
Hmm.
it what I've found, certainly, and what other organizations have found, is that we get new people coming into archaeology and history and becoming interested in archaeology and history who have never really been interested in it before, but now because it's in Minecraft, now they're interested.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so there's people are trying to take advantage of it. When it's organizations, it takes a while to come up with a plan and get funding and then do the thing. Whereas for me, I'm just an individual, so I can put videos together a lot faster than an organization can commission a map, for example. But it's definitely something that a lot of organizations are looking into as a possible teaching tool.
That's so interesting. One of the things when you talk about the bringing new people in is I'm wondering or I'm curious, is the concept of like building an archaeological site in Minecraft an accessibility thing too? Because
Absolutely.
how accessible are so many ancient archaeological sites for people who may have mobility issues or other you know issues like that, and maybe can't on their own get to those sites or experience them with the same amount of like fullness as someone else might.
Yes, 100%. If like a million percent, yes. Um, as I said, I have 7 chronic illnesses, so I'm a disabled person. I have mobility issues. I can't easily walk around a museum for a couple of hours. I
Hmm.
definitely can't easily walk around an archaeological site for a couple of hours. And there are many people who are less mobile than I am, or who have other types of impairments, or who just could never afford to go to that place in the first place.
Yeah,
So the
absolutely.
first yeah, so the first place that I built, the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, for example, going up the steps, you're not able to go up the steps anymore. It's off limits to
Hmm.
visitors. You can't just climb the steps of the pyramid. But with my build in Minecraft, you can climb up the steps and you can explore the inside of the temple. So there are lots of sites where we can't necessarily allow people to go to certain areas for their own safety. Sometimes we can't allow people to go to certain areas because it would damage the archaeology, and that
Hmm.
would be a problem. And then there are all sorts of reasons why people might not be able to go to a specific spot to begin with. And some archaeological sites, like there are archaeological sites on the top of mountains. It's there's certain ones
Yeah.
where it's like this is somewhere nobody is going to easily get to, so we really can't turn it into a site for tourists, for example. And being able to build it in Minecraft allows people to access those sites who would never be able to access them otherwise. And the other thing about Minecraft, and this is kind of where it's another way that my brain kind of fell into it. My PhD is in digital imaging, especially with 3D modeling. So
Mhm.
I've done a lot of 3D modeling in archaeology of artifacts myself, but I've also done 3D modeling of buildings and sites and such. And 3D modeling, like laser scanning and that kind of stuff, photogrammetry, those work to an extent, and they do allow us to create 3D models that people can kind of click at different points and kind of explore with text. But Minecraft, you can basically make a 3D model of a site, and you don't need to take the expensive laser scanner out to wherever the site is and hope that it's not raining and such. You don't need to necessarily
Yeah.
go through the whole process. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing that. We absolutely should where we can. But it means that certainly in the meantime, we can be creating sites in Minecraft that allow the general public to explore them in a satisfying way, because it's not like we as folks who are interested in the past, we don't need to know exactly how many centimeters is between one corner of a burial and another corner of a burial. I mean, it would be interesting, but like we don't need that to be represented in Minecraft necessarily. So a lot of the like accuracy that archaeologists really need in their research doesn't need to be replicated in Minecraft or in this display for the public, and we can create stuff in Minecraft a lot faster and a lot easier than those 3D models. So yeah, it scratches a lot of my archaeological interest itches.
No, that's really interesting. When Minecraft added archaeology, you were extremely excited, as you've
Oh my
said.
goodness, yeah. Oh my goodness.
What did they do right, and what could they do better?
Oh, they did so much right, and I'm so proud of them.
Oh, that's so
I
good to hear, though.
Yeah, I made a video when the snapshot first came out of like everything I thought about the update. And then I ended up being in touch with Ulraf, who was the lead developer for the archaeological stuff,
Hmm.
and some of the other members of the team had gotten in touch as well, like the main designer of the trail ruins, for example. The there's Yeah, I don't think they misstepped like at all
Oh,
in the
really?
archaeology update. The only thing, if I could be nitpicky, and this is very much nitpicky, if I could be nitpicky, I would want the tool to be a trowel and not a brush, because archaeologists, we use our trowel, and that's the same as like my brand logo is a trowel.
Hmm.
That's our main digging tool rather than a brush. But that's like, it's so nitpicky. And the other thing about trowels in Minecraft is that it could be difficult to represent it in pixel art form of the size that item icons are. So like I can see why they went with a brush.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing is that I may or may not be responsible for the change from pottery shards to pottery sherds, at least partially.
I was going to
Uh,
ask you about shards versus sherds because
yeah,
I knew that you were involved in that change.
yeah.
So,
I wasn't like super heavily in discussion with anybody or anything, but in the video, I talked about how in archaeology we call them pottery sherds or pot sherds or sherds, and all of those are with an e, not an a. And that's just the term that we use in archaeology. And so when you're talking about shards in archaeology, archaeologists assume that you're talking about glass, for example, instead of ceramics. So in that video, one of the things that I talked about was this difference in terminology. And I told a story about how when I was working at museums, one of the activities that we did with kids was making candles and talking about how people made candles in the past. And so when I would run this station, I would ask the kids where the wax from candles comes from. And inevitably, before Minecraft added the bees, the first answer was always earwax, which is a wonderfully horrific answer because it makes sense. Kids thinking about wax, they're thinking about the types of wax that they know. They've heard about earwax. so they say it, but they haven't thought through the logistics of actually making a candle out of earwax and how disgusting that would be. So I could walk them through that process, and that was a lot of fun. But once the bee update came out, even once the bee update was announced, kids, every time I asked that question, the first answer was never earwax anymore. It was always beeswax, which is
Oh,
a correct
wow.
answer for candles. And it was like somebody flipped a switch. It was a night and day shift. And so basically I put that in the video, and the devs were like, okay, that's convincing enough, effectively. And other people, I should say, I'm not the only person who was saying this. There were a lot of archaeologists saying, it's really, please call them sherds. But yeah, I know that the devs saw my video, so I think I'm at least partially responsible for it. So yeah, but I'm okay with that. If anybody hates the change, feel free to hate me for it. But at least I'm getting you to learn proper archaeological terms.
Yeah, it's so funny because when that first change happened, I was like, sherds, what's a sherd? And I
Yeah,
had no idea, right? And I was really confused by it because I was like, in my head, it's shards, right? So I
yeah,
looked it up and I was like, oh, this is actually a term. I know
mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why, but that's actually the term. So I was like, oh, okay. And then I definitely saw you and I think Pix having a conversation about it, maybe over Twitter. And I was
Yes,
like, oh, all right, okay. I'm here for that.
yeah,
And personally,
yeah,
I like that it's accurate. It's weird, right? Because it's not a term that people would ever use. I think in day to day conversations, you would never. I don't think in
yeah.
day to day that if I broke like a terracotta pot in my house, if I had one, that I
You
would be
wouldn't be
like, oh,
calling them
there's
sherds.
shards all over the
No,
floor. I would say
not at all.
shards.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of the accuracy, I think there is a benefit to it, and
Yeah,
now every person who plays Minecraft is gonna have that weird little tidbit of knowledge in their head.
yeah, yeah. And it's that's another reason why, like, I don't fault the dev team for calling them shards first and then making the switch, because as you say, shard is not an everyday term, but shard is. And so even
Yes.
if you're making this archaeological update, it's difficult to know that like, if you don't know that there's a specific archaeological term for broken ceramic pieces, why would you question shards? That they had no
Mm-hmm.
reason to think that there was a different term. So but as soon as they heard that there was, they made the change, like, in the next snapshot. It was an immediate change, basically. And I think that just speaks to the quality of what they were trying to put out with the archaeology update. The other thing, like, all of the things, there's so many things that people criticize about the update, and they're all things that I love because they're so accurate to archaeology. So, like, the loot tables, people don't like the loot that you get from trail ruins or just archaeological sites in general. I'm like, yeah, but it's accurate to archaeology. You end up with 17 different sticks. Look, if I found a wooden hoe in an archaeological site, I would be ecstatic. That's not something we get, and sometimes it's not, most of archaeology isn't the shiny stuff, for example.
Mm-hmm.
um and then, some people were concerned about the coloration of the blocks in the trail ruins, but those are colors that were used in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. They're used in a whole bunch of different ancient societies. So the colors are perfectly fine. In terms of, like, the buildings looking run down, some people are like, the buildings look like they've been destroyed. I'm like, yeah, but they're archaeological sites. That's kind of the point.
Yeah.
They're not gonna be pristine ruins that you can immediately turn into a walkable tourist attraction. They're decayed. So yeah, the thing that I really need to sing their praises for is how sus sand and gravel work,
Okay.
just as a whole. The fact that they break if they fall, and it's either shattered pottery or shattered glass that you hear as a sound effect, that is such a beautiful game mechanic. I don't think they could have done it better in terms of trying to emphasize that players need to be careful when excavating these trail ruins, and that if you're not careful, you lose artifacts, you lose archaeology. That's true in real life, and I don't think they could have designed that any better. It makes me so happy. And the other thing is that every time I talk to fellow archaeologists about this, it makes them really happy as well. Like I'll start talking about archaeology and Minecraft and be like, okay. And they get this look on their face like, all right, we're going to hear again about like Indiana Jones style looting a temple kind of thing. And then I tell them about sus sand and gravel and how they're gravity blocks and they break. And when they break, you don't get anything from them. And their faces light up and they're like, okay, this is different. They're actually trying to do archaeology here. So yeah, it's such a good system. It's, I would say, perfect. I want sus dirt. If I could add stuff to it, I want sus dirt, and I want to be able to dye the sherds, or at least different colors of sherds, because those would be fun. But
Oh, gotcha.
but
Like
those are
similar to the different colors of terracotta.
exactly, yeah. But those are like pipe dreams. Like eventually, could you add this, please? Because it would make it even cooler. It's rather than like critiques of the current system. I think the current system is great. I completely understand people who are not enthused by trail ruins and who have excavated a few and are like, yeah, I'm done with those. Totally fair. It's not necessarily a part of the game that's your jam, and it doesn't have to be. But yeah, archaeologists. I've never seen an archaeologist be upset at the archaeology mechanics in Minecraft. I have yet to see any archaeologist be remotely concerned or upset about it.
Mhm. No, I love hearing your perspective on it because it does seem like they did a really good job and that the update was very well thought through and
Yes.
executed well. And personally, I really enjoyed it. Like, it's not something I would do all the time. Like, if I see a trail ruin, I'm not like, oh,
Hmm.
I have to get out the brush right now, you know? But
Yeah.
I enjoy finding sus, sand, and gravel and giving it a little brush and seeing what I get because it's kind of like a little loot sort of thing, you know? You don't know what you're
Yeah.
gonna get,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll get a cool shard, like a shard or whatever. I'll get a diamond.
Hmm.
And it's a really fun mechanic. I think it's an interesting way to implement getting new unique items in the game that isn't just killing a mob or opening a chest as well.
Yes. I
Because I'm
agree.
so tired of every loot being just open a chest.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And the other thing is that so Pixel Riffs, Joel Duggan, Ulraf, and I excavated a trail ruin
Ah,
shortly after
yes.
1.20 released.
I watched that
Um,
stream.
Yeah, we did a live stream of it. And what's great is that since that live stream, people keep like sending me images and messages and posts of them excavating their trail ruins like an archaeologist. And it makes me
Oh,
so
that's
happy.
cute.
And they're like marking where they found stuff and what they found where, and like refining the technique for Minecraft to, in terms of like, oh, because in the live stream we used wool blocks, like I think it was red wool or something,
Hmm.
and marked where stuff was, or maybe I gave us each a different color. I don't remember. And like put an item frame and then put the item in the thing. And then somebody in my community was like, actually, I decided to use glass instead so that you could still see through it to get as much of the stuff around it as you could. And that's a brilliant idea, to use glass. So like people are refining the techniques of how to properly excavate a site in Minecraft archaeologically. And yeah, I keep getting messages of people being like, I did this the proper way, like a real archaeologist, and it just makes me so happy. It's my favorite thing.
That is actually so amazing. You're literally creating the next generation of archaeologists.
I was saying, in that stream I said to Ulraf, I was like, I hope you know that like people as early as like fall of 2023 are gonna, or was it 2023? Yeah, when it was released. As early as like fall of 2023 are gonna be starting archaeology or history programs, in part because archaeology was added to Minecraft. And he was kind of like, not, it wasn't that he didn't believe me, but he was like, I don't know about that kind of thing, like the humble sort of, are you
Hmm.
sure? And literally less than 12 hours after we finished our stream, somebody tagged me on Twitter and said that they were going to start their undergraduate degree that fall in history and classics. And so I sent it to Ulraf. I was like, you know how I said this like 12 hours ago? So yeah, so they're already people who are doing archaeology, in part because there's archaeology in Minecraft, and it makes me so happy.
That is so fantastic. It really goes to show, I think, how diverse Minecraft is and all of the different ways that it impacts the people who play it. You know,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
have people who will play this game and go, "Oh, I really want to become an artist because they love, creating organics." Or they
Hmm.
say, "Ah, I want to become a farmer." They really love the animal aspect. Who knows, or maybe they want to become an archaeologist.
Yeah, it's so great. It's been so much fun seeing that get developed and then seeing the things that they've added with 1.21, which aren't huge aside from the fact that there's an entire extra structure in the game now. So like people now
Yeah.
since 1.21 came out, people have been messaging me and talking to me about like what possible interpretations are for the trial chambers and like okay, what does it say about a society that created something like the trial chambers? Can we tell, anything about whoever built these based on what's in them? So there's been lore of like or discussions of oh, maybe this is just like a ritual thing, but maybe it's something like a coming of age sort of proving yourself situation. And the other element is like, oh my goodness, did they have a lot of copper? so
Yeah.
so yeah, lots of copper, or lots of value attributed to copper if it's like a high status kind of structure. If it's something that they used valuable materials for, then we can infer that they valued copper. But like yeah, there's so many possibilities just with the trial chambers, and that's before we get into the added pottery sherds and things.
Hmm.
So yeah, I love it. It's great. I love that people are thinking about things that way too, that like they're people are now thinking about new structures as archaeological sites in Minecraft, even
Yeah.
though they don't have any sus, sand, or gravel in them. And it makes me so happy.
You could infer, I'm thinking of the ways that you could interpret copper in the trial chambers. Like you could infer that it has some sort of protective aspect culturally, that they believe that it
Yes.
would keep these creatures contained, or there's so many different ways
Yeah.
you could think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want someone to do like a complete archaeological dissection almost of every Minecraft structure and talk about how all the interpretations of it now. I think someone should do that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wonder who.
It's well, it is in my current notebook of ideas. So
Yeah, let's go.
yeah.
Just giving you way more work to do that you don't
Yeah,
need.
yeah. That's fine. I've excavated enough trail ruins. I can excavate more. They only take like 6 hours. It's fine.
They do take a long time. They're huge. I was
They're
stunned the first
huge.
time I excavated one how large the structure was.
Yeah. They're huge. They're a pain in the butt when there's water involved.
Oh yeah.
Um and again, like I say this still adoring that that's the fact because like it's so true in real archaeology that stuff that involves water is infinitely more complicated.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you get a trail ruin that's like half to two-thirds underwater, it takes a lot longer to excavate it than like
Yeah.
6 hours. It takes so long.
It really does. Like I've definitely had that happen and I was like, okay, all right, let me get rid of
Yep.
this. Like
Yep. Yep. It's like, oh, I can see half the structure because it's in the ocean. Oh, half the structure's in the ocean.
yeah.
Like, yep. Yep. Hmm.
Like that's not good. I've
Yeah.
also having excavated a trail rune in Minecraft, I actually completely changed up the tools I was using because I was like, all right, this shovel is not working. Like, because my
Yes.
normal efficiency 5 netherite shovel that like tears
Yes.
through stuff would destroy things that I wanted, and that it
Yeah.
would destroy the sus sand or the sus gravel. And I was like, okay, all right, let me just craft like a garbage iron shovel and go through very slowly because if I use my
Yeah.
normal tools, this is not gonna work. I have to go
Yeah.
about this differently.
We did that on the stream with Pix and Joel and Ulraf as well. We had two sets of tools, one that was efficiency 5 so that we could dig the stuff around the trail ruins, and then one that was like efficiency 1 maybe, or maybe didn't even have efficiency on it, so that we wouldn't accidentally mine all of the sus sand and gravel.
Hmm.
And the other thing is that Joel realized because you never pick up sus sand, if you use the pick block button, so the middle mouse button by default on a sand or gravel block that you think might be sus, if it then puts something in your inventory so that you're holding sand, then you know that it's sand. But if you pick block and nothing happens, then you know it's sus sand because you never pick up sus sand unless you. I mean, you
Oh.
can if you go through like convoluted, like bubble columns and things like that. But it's if you're just doing it regularly, that's a way to quickly tell whether it's sus sand or not. Is if it pix block. You can also just start excavating with the brush and see if anything starts moving. But yeah.
That is so smart. All right, well, Archeo, I could sit here and talk to you all day, but we are coming up on an hour, and I have no idea how I'm gonna edit out any of this because it was all really interesting. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining me for a fish review. I hope you had a great time.
Thank you for having me. I did.
So, Archeo, can you please tell everybody where they can find you out on the internet?
Absolutely. You can find me as ArcheoPlays on YouTube or Twitch. I make YouTube videos and then I stream on Twitch, and I'm going to be streaming simultaneously to YouTube as well. And actually, on Saturday, I'm starting a new season of Archeo SMP, which is an archaeology SMP that I'm in with, that I made with a bunch of creators, where we take ruins from previous seasons and we bring them into the new world and do archaeology themed builds. So yeah, so that'll be on Twitch and YouTube. Or you can find me if you want social media. I'm also at ArcheoPlays on Twitter and Blue Sky and Facebook, and you'll find me on Instagram and Threads, but I never post there.
All right, well, thank you so much, Archeo. I really appreciate you joining me for a fish review.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a bunch of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, bye.
Bye.